Hi. You may not be aware that there's a new Texas Chainsaw Massacre film currently in preparation, due for release on Netflix later this year. This actually follows another released, I believe, in 2019 that completely bypassed cinemas and streaming services and is available as a DVD release and an online rental titled simply Leatherface. So I was interested to go back and watch some of the installments in the series that I hadn't previously seen. The first original film I saw on the very last day that it was illegal in Halloween 1999, and I was extremely unimpressed. I thought it was like a live action cartoon, not in any way scary, and consisted of a lot of running and screaming. The second film, when I eventually got around to seeing it, I thought was probably the worst film I've ever seen. Loud, obnoxious, offensive in terms of its philosophy, its attitude towards women, unpleasant to look at, a horrible sound mix, an incoherent story. There was nothing about it that was in any way likable or engaging or interesting or in any way not violently offensive to my sensibilities. In contrast, the remake and its prequel, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, I found to be entirely passable, not particularly deep or complex or intelligent, but on their own terms, perfectly reasonable movies. And a later, um, many years later, sequel to the original film titled Texas Chainsaw or Texas Chainsaw 3D, I thought was probably the best film I'd seen in the series. Again, somewhat by the numbers and wrote for a horror movie, but effectively made and quite entirely palatable, really. So I'm interested in going back and seeing some of the films that I hadn't seen, and the first of these was Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, later released as Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's notable for having in its cast two huge names just before they broke big, Renée Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey. Um, the film was actually held back from release because it was having problems and needed to be recut. And by the time that it actually finally reached cinemas, Jerry Maguire and A Time to Kill had both come out, and Zellweger and McConaughey were now huge names. So the film obviously tried to capitalize on that. It follows a similar pattern to a lot of other slasher movies. There's a high school prom, characters on their way there or leaving go off the beaten track, fall into the sphere of the cannibalistic family, and are picked off one by one in gruesome ways, leaving only the final girl type character, played by Zellweger, who faces off against the family, led by the psychotic Vilma, played by McConaughey, and eventually manages to get away. But there are also these strange uh, diversions and subplots that add little, if real substance, but are somehow completely insane. The film was written and directed by Kim Henkel, who co wrote the original film, and there seems to be an attempt to tie this back to the first film, even though there aren't really any returning characters apart from Leatherface himself. In this version, the hulking brute of the original is really bullied and mistreated by the other members of the family, but it's also suggested that the character is in some way transgender or has gender issues by dressing in a female skin and adopting a female persona later in the film. I don't know if it's meant to be saying anything particularly profound or interesting or intelligent, but it's awkward and uncomfortable, and I can't imagine it would have been too easy to watch at the time. Um, McConaughey's performance as Vilma is wildly over the top, and there are weird details like he has a mechanical leg, which appears to be just a metal leg brace, but it's operated by remote control. And when I say remote control, I mean the kind that you use for a television. And there are two of these, and there's at one point a scene where two characters are battling for control of his leg using a remote control. And it is literally as bizarre as that sounds. The dinner scene, as copied from the original film, is interrupted by the arrival of a suited character that follows on from previous comments that characters made about the Illuminati being behind everything. And it turns out that the cannibalistic family is in some way part of an experiment in terrorizing people, um, which is resolved at the end of the movie when Vilma is chasing after young Jenny and he's hit by the wheel of a passing crop dusting plane and immediately dies. Jenny is then picked up by the Illuminati character in a limousine and driven to hospital. And that's the end of the movie. and this is pretty strange. Um, it's a bizarre film. Jenny's characterization fluctuates wildly from one scene to the next. Sometimes she's assertive, sometimes she's cowering in a corner. The film can't really decide what tone it wants to have, whether it's trying to be a parody of the original film, whether it's trying to retread it or reinvent it in some modern way. It's really a complete mess. Um, the performances, given the material, are better than you'd think. That's to say, McConaughey is very enjoyable in this over the top role. Um, Given the chance, Zellweger is very endearing and likable in the main role. But the rest of the film is such an incoherent mess of gibberish. It's hard to know exactly what Henkel was aiming for. There are two cuts of the film in circulation. I saw the recut version released in 1997, but it's the original version from '95 that Henkel says is his preferred version. I can't imagine how it could really be any more coherent than what we're given now, and frankly, I don't really want to find out.